Hey, Amr, thanks a lot for joining us today. So we're going to talk about email security. Maybe before we start, you can introduce yourself to our audience. What is your role at the company and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Amr Mustafa, and I'm Senior Executive Vice President at Indusflow. And I'm basically responsible for running the IT Services Division, which includes all services related to caring for the IT infrastructure for our customers.
Great. So the topic of today is layered security. So we're educating our audience on what are the various layers of cybersecurity tools and technologies and education that a company should have in place to properly manage their security. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about email security. What is email security?
So, email security is basically all of the services and processes that you put into place that are designed to protect email. So these can include everything from education of users on proper usage of email, how to stay safe as it relates to email, but of course, more importantly, various technology components that are put into place to protect the integrity of email. As most people know, a lot of threats, a lot of security threats are born from email. So a lot of organizations that are exposed to security threats have been exposed to them through a bad email that's made it through their security net.
Got it. And what are some specific types of security threats that you've seen out there?
Well, if you think about email, email is a system that's a global communication system that we all rely on every day. But actually, email has very little security built into it as a technology. So what that means is that on the internet, anybody could send an email message to anybody else, and there's really no, generally speaking, there's really no security mechanism, overarching security mechanism that allows a person to send email on the internet or disallows them. So by the very nature of email, it's inherently an insecure platform. So that means that organizations have to come up with or implement several components, technological components that are going to safeguard the integrity of the email that's coming in. A lot of people are talking these days about ransomware. Ransomware is just one category of virus or malware that's in circulation throughout the world. And so the typical scenario is that a person receives an email. The email has an attachment. That attachment contains the malware, the ransomware virus, or any other type of malware. And by double clicking on the attachment, they then activate that particular piece of malware, which then infects their computer, which results in effects to the wider network.
Got it. So now getting to the actual technologies that are typically deployed by an organization, I hear a lot about appliances like Barracuda. I hear a lot about cloud-based advanced email security tools. So what are the kinds of tools out there that an organization should be implementing to better secure their email?
Sure. So yeah, that's right. There are basically two main categories of protection out there. One is an appliance-based approach, and then the other is a service-based approach. And then, well, there's kind of a third one as well, which would be more of a software-based approach. So organizations may have their email hosted internally on a corporate email server, or they may have it hosted externally on any number of cloud-based email service providers, such as Office 365. Or they may have a hybrid approach as well. So the question is, when email comes into the organization, at what point is the email being filtered? So if you have an appliance-based approach, then typically you're using corporate email servers as opposed to a hosted service. and the appliance would be hosted, in front of would sit in front of your mail server. So all inbound email would hit the appliance first. The appliance would take care of filtering those emails to make sure they're good, and then forward only the clean stuff to your corporate email servers. The other approach would be to use a cloud-based service that would essentially perform the same function. So all inbound email would go to the service provider first. The service provider would filter those email messages and then forward the clean stuff, to your corporate email server or to your cloud-based email service provider. So in both of these approaches, both of these approaches involve email hitting a filtering service or filtering appliance first prior to the email being forwarded to the actual mail server.
Got it. And so the other thing I've heard is that many of these cloud-based email platforms like Office 365 and G Suite already have their built-in email security software built into their product. So why would an organization that's using cloud-based email need to, or maybe they may not need to, get involved with an additional layer of security through either a cloud-based or an appliance-based email security software?
Right. So as with the security field in general, you can always get more, right? So the principle that is at play in security is that you could always pay more to get more. The question is, what is appropriate for your organization? So the built-in protections that many of the big online cloud-based email service providers have is generally at the level of spam protection, right? So Office 365, G Suite, these have spam protection features that you get, as a basic feature of the basic product. And those are suitable for protecting you against a lot of spam email. Now, spam email is generally junk email. So these might be advertisements, more of an annoyance than anything else. Although it sounds like it may not constitute a large volume of email, we do find that with some customers, 60 to 80% of inbound email is actually spam. So it could actually, for some organizations, constitute a majority of inbound email. So certainly having a basic level of spam protection is important, more from a productivity standpoint, than a security standpoint. I mean, the lines are blurred often, but spam and junk mail, strictly speaking, is more of an annoyance than a security threat. So the question of what can the basic level of protection protect you from is essentially at the level of spam or junk email. Yeah. Now, we would want our customers, organizations would want a higher degree of protection than just the junk. An example is, like on the junk side, you may be getting all kinds of junk email from lists or from newsletters. Maybe you subscribe to them, maybe you haven't subscribed to them. They're basically advertising products. But on the flip side, you may receive just one email with a virus attached to it. This email may not be sent, in large quantities, may not be sent to everybody in the organization, may be targeted to be sent to a specific person within the organization. And so from the perspective of junk email, it's technically not junk email. It's not spam. It's not really advertising, but it is an email that contains a very dangerous attachment. So that's where you would want to get a more advanced type of security protection for your email system. So there are a number of providers out there, MailAssure, AppRiver. These are all popular providers for email security. And what they do is they add an extra layer of protection from malware and from viruses. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think about an email that comes in, this is more of a classic example. An email comes in with an attachment. So in order for that type of email to really infect your computer, you would have to sort of jump through a few hoops. The typical example, and it might sound like people wouldn't do this, but people do actually do this. The classic example is that an email comes in, it's got an attachment. Now that attachment is inherently dangerous. It might be a word macro, for example. So when the user receives the attachment, if their spider senses don't start tingling, then they might say, "Oh, well, this is an email with an invoice attached to it." So they double click on the attachment, and the invoice, it's in a zip format, but they don't think anything of it. So they double click on it and they open up the zip file. Now, so far so good, but the zip file contains a Word document, right? So they say, "Oh, well, this is the invoice. I should double click on the Word document." When they double click on the Word document, they get a warning that pops up on their computer that says this Word document contains macros and could harm your computer. But still, they say, "No, it's an invoice. So let me go ahead and accept that." And then once they jump through that hoop, then the virus activates and infects their computer. So those types of attachment-based security threats, people are getting a lot more savvy to that, and you really do have to jump through a few hoops in order to allow yourself to be infected by that type of malware. So it's not always as simple as that. Some emails could contain links, web links, that the user needs to click on, where they're taken to a website, and the website asks them to download something which they have to accept, and then they get the infection that way. So in a classic email security system that only checks emails for virus attached for virus attachments, that system wouldn't catch the second type of security threat, which is an email that comes in which just has links to websites that contain downloadables that are virus laden. So it's really the online security service providers, email security providers that are kind of working day and night to make sure that their databases are updated, not just databases of known viruses where their security engines are scanning for virus attachments to emails, but also the databases that maintain lists of websites and URLs and IP addresses that are known sources of threats that people may click on and then download a virus that way. So because it's a constantly shifting area, these websites could be popping up on a daily basis that are now hosting downloadable viruses. So that's really why it's from our perspective, it's important to have the email security experts, the companies that are in the business of knowing that, and they're doing that day and night, to have them provide the email security layer for our customers.
Got it. And so with as a managed services provider, Indusflow is managing email security for a number of our customers. Could you enlighten our audience on some of the tools that we're currently employing, or what is our strategy around email security for our current customers, and then approximately what is the approximate price point that customers should expect to pay to get advanced email security software?
Sure. So first of all, I'd say that our approach has changed over the years. In the past, like maybe 7 years ago, even 10 years ago, where most of our customers had on-premises, corporate email servers, our approach was more of a software-based approach. So a software security layer running on the corporate email server, in those days was adequate to provide a good layer of scanning before forwarding the email to the corporate email server. But now that approach has really not kept up. So we are using a number of cloud-based email security providers. Our go-to partner currently is AppRiver, and they've been doing a pretty good job. So with cloud-based email security providers, the architecture of that solution, I mean, there are different vendors out there, but generally they work the same way. The architecture is that the company would, the customer would, or we would do this on behalf of our customer, we would change the MX records for that particular domain to point to the email security provider. So what that means is that once the MX records are changed and they're pointed toward the email security provider, all inbound email would then hit the email security provider first,
Sure.
right? There, all of the emails would be filtered, and then the email security provider would forward on the emails to the actual email service, which could be cloud-based or another corporate email server. So the nice thing about that is it's kind of a store and forward approach. Most of these cloud-based email security providers don't store the email beyond the time that they absolutely need to store it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as long as everything's working, that should be milliseconds or maybe seconds. But in the event that your corporate mail server is down, or even your cloud-based email service provider is down, it does happen. Sometimes G Suite has issues, sometimes Office 365 has issues. So rather than the email failing delivery, the email is then stored at the email security provider's servers until the corporate email servers are back up again, right? So that gives you an added layer of resiliency to your email solution. That way emails don't get bounced. They could be stored in this sort of limbo state, for a day or a couple of days. Most of these providers will store it for anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. So that really gives you some added protection. And then, of course, once the email service is back up again, then the service provider forwards the emails to them. So that's generally how they're architected. Most of these solutions are around $4 per mailbox per month, or in that sort of price range. So it's pretty affordable. Of course, when it comes to security versus affordability, companies have to really have a serious approach to security. Depending on the customer size, if we're talking about SMB, they're not going to spend obviously millions of dollars on a security solution. So it's got to be kind of right-sized. And the nice thing about hosted email security platforms is that they're priced on a per mailbox basis. So if you're a small organization and you've got 30, 50 mailboxes, then it's priced on a per mailbox basis. And similarly, if you've got thousands of mailboxes, it's going to be a higher price tag.
Got it. Great. Well, that was very informative, Amir. I really appreciate your time. And we'll hook up at a later time.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.